Hello and welcome to Stretford Paddock. My name is Joe and this is a one-to-one interview. I am joined by sports reporter Ben Jacobs. We're going to be talking about all things Manchester United Takeover and transfers as well. First of all, Ben, how are you doing?
Very well. It's busy times, Joe, and I think that everybody at Manchester United is hoping this week is one of clarity.
Well, I think we're in need of one because it seemed like we were heading towards clarity. It felt like things were moving, maybe not in the direction everyone wanted, but certainly in a direction that seemed to have an end to it. You know, a couple of weeks ago, it looked as though Jim Ratcliffe was in the lead. This bid that involved the Glazers staying on in a sort of minority capacity, that looked to be the favourite. Then we saw this last-minute bid from Sheikh Jassim. Then we've seen, talk of, exclusivity and all that. What is your latest on your understanding of the takeover at Manchester United?
Well, I think the first thing we should say is we're recording this on a Tuesday morning and things are very fluid at the moment. So naturally things can change either throughout the day or the week. Mm-hmm. But if we look back from last Friday and over the weekend, both groups were still engaged in dialogue. And I think that is very significant. And there was a lot of excitement, especially from those that feel the 9-2 Foundation is the best bid for Manchester United, that they were negotiating a period of exclusivity as per the Reuters article. And I've got huge respect for everybody else's line of reporting. But as things stand, nobody is in exclusivity. The article didn't say that Qatar had exclusivity, only that they were negotiating exclusivity. Sources that are close to the selling side have been adamant that exclusivity and preferred bidder at this point now, it wasn't earlier in the process, but now, is almost a bit of a myth. It's a media construct, and this isn't about exclusivity, because that would suggest that somebody is going to enter into final negotiations, which would, ironically, be an indication that the process isn't as advanced. Whereas my sources still indicate that the next step is about a winner, which I think is important because some will call it preferred bidder for ease and others will get more excited because they believe that the deal is effectively done. And winner is actually in between those two positions because preferred bidder comes with exclusivity, so you can do your final due diligence and negotiate. I think we're beyond that. Both groups are on the brink and ready to sign. And similarly, completion, as in the deal is done and they own the club, is a process after you've agreed terms. And then you enter into the completion process, which requires things like the Premier League owners and directors test and the transfer of funds. And in the case of Qatar, the delisting of the public shares. So we're sort of in between, I think, those two aspects. Beyond preferred bidder, even if it's called that for ease or simplicity, and not yet at it being done in the sense of transactionally complete. So now both groups are waiting for a clear indication as to whether the Glazers are going to proceed with them. And it is right to say there's a lot of positivity around the Qatar camp, much more so after the fifth and improved bid was tabled. But from Sir Jim Ratcliffe's perspective, that group has also been cautiously optimistic. And no doubt people listening will say that's just sitting on the fence. But it's such a big moment for Manchester United that it is very important as journalists that we report responsibly. And at no point have I or others said Qatar won't win, only that at the time we're recording this, they're not yet in any period of exclusivity. Exclusivity may not be granted in a negotiation sense, because we may be beyond that. And ultimately, everybody is now waiting for the Glazers to show their hand.
The mention of waiting there seems to be a constant theme throughout this. This whole process started, I think it was in November, when we first heard the word that, the Glazers were looking at this sort of potential restructuring, including the opportunity for a sale. Are the two parties getting sick of this? Because I know as fans, and I'm sure yourself as a journalist who's reporting on this day in, day out with, little kind of update here and there. And, you know, this whole sort of trickling sale that we've seen, you know, you get one more chance to bid, you get one more chance to bid. These are some of the most rich and powerful people in the world. Are they not sick of sitting around and waiting for the Glazers who, again, you know, not that it's all about money, but aren't as rich or as powerful as either of the two people trying to buy the club? Are they not sick of waiting all this time? Because as fans we are, and like you said, as journalists, it's becoming slightly laborious. What is the position of the two potential new owners?
Well, I think everyone is frustrated, the minority investors as well, because of a lack of communication. And by communication, we should be very clear. The groups are waiting to find out whether they're either going to win or they're front runners at least, so they can start to understand the likely conclusion of all of this. There is back and forth, there is communication, and a takeover is a game as well. That's very important to stress. There's always going to be negotiation. There's always going to be a desire on the selling side, both Rain and the Glazers, to try and push up the value of the football club. And this has taken place so publicly, and there's so much distaste for the Glazers amongst the fan base that it's become infuriating to fans, even though a standard takeover would take 9 months, and we're not at 9 months yet since the process started. But due to the fact there's been deadlines, due to the fact there's been a lower volume of bidders than perhaps was anticipated, it's looked like such a clear choice for the Glazers, unless they're going to pivot and stay. And that would either be minority investment or no sale. There's two options on the table, and one option is giving Joel and Avram at least a chance to stay, and the other option is for 100% of the club. So I think the fan base are right now to be simply saying, make up your mind, because every day they delay, it damages the asset that either Sir Jim Ratcliffe or Sheikh Jassim is hoping to own. And as a journalist, it's very difficult to cover blow by blow, especially because I think the audience that crave the coverage want to look at this in transfer terms. So people don't understand, why is there not a winner? Why is there not a clear price? Why is there not a clear process? That's just not how this kind of transaction works. And sometimes the context is key. And even though it's slower and more laborious, it's vital to understand. But of course, the fan base are just interested in who's going to win, and they don't really care anymore. Maybe they did a few months ago, but now I don't think anyone cares that's been following this about process, whether it's preferred bidder, whether it's winner, whether it's done, whether it's exclusive, whether it's not exclusive, whether it's under 6 billion, whether it's over 6 billion. I think the fan base couldn't give two hoots now at this point. They're just interested in who's actually going to own our football club if the Glazers go in full or in part, and when's it going to get done? Because if there's no clarity, there's frustration, because it's in real danger of overshadowing Manchester United's summer. And as a journalist, I understand that. And our aim is to go to all sides and try and put a picture together as to what's going to happen. And nothing really moved over the course of the weekend from where we were at Friday. But we're recording this at a time when, by the time it goes out, I believe in the afternoon, things may have moved and changed and picked up. So as irritating as it is to appear to at times sit on the fence, that's what virtually every source has been doing for the last 2 weeks. Even those directly in the groups are hesitant to say that they think they are the favourites. It's always cautious optimism. It's always positivity. It's never anything more definitive than that, which tells you exactly what I've reported for the last few weeks, that the Glazers have got both groups on the brink, ready to sign, ready to proceed, but no green light. And now we wait and see, even potentially by the time people are listening to this, whether that changes today, tomorrow, or by the end of the week, because it is decision time now. The game should be gone. The negotiation should have ended. So coming back to what I said before, there was that growing feeling off the back of Reuters that Qatar might be entering into exclusive negotiations, but Qatar have also said, since they placed their fifth improved offer, they're not prepared to engage on the financials anymore. And we need to be clear about that, because Qatar didn't create that Friday deadline for walking away. And they didn't create that Friday deadline to say, if we don't get anything in terms of progress or positivity, we're not going to reach out to you. Even after things were more positive, they still made it clear to the Glazers, we're not going up again. We're not messing around with numbers, because if we're not in pretty much now, or starting the process of getting in, then we're in big trouble. because everybody knows that even after a group is, in inverted commas, selected or signed, there's still all of the formalities that can take time, which I've already outlined. And I know some people say it's 12 weeks. I would be very cautious on those timescales, because the actual path to full acquisition in terms of how much time it's going to take is different for both INEOS and 9-2 Foundation. And that's another point that's worth, I think, making very clear. For Ratcliffe not buying 100% of the club versus Jassim taking the Glazers 69 and delisting the public shares, it is a slightly different process in terms of the legalities and the formalities. So I wouldn't take 12 weeks as given. If it's fast for one group, it might be 6 weeks. If it's slow for another group, it might be 12 weeks. But that anxiousness is there because both Ratcliffe and Jassim were desperate to be in for day one of the window. And now we're week one of the window, and neither of them have been told categorically that they're going to win.
You talk about that Friday deadline, which is, as you've sort of laid out there, this is our final offer. It's there on the table. We're not pulling it away, but we're not going to be raising it. We're not going to be changing the financial side of things from Sheikh Jassim. Do you think that that's the case with Jim Ratcliffe? Because we've heard about his most recent offer, and that seemed to come in the last sort of fourth round of offers, and that has stuck since. And there were reports that he was the favourite, and then this fifth offer came in from the Qatari side that seems to have sort of levelled things up or pushed Qatari ahead. Do you think there's a chance that INEOS increase their bid, now, following these reports that Sheikh Jassim may have sort of pulled ahead slightly? Do you think that's an option?
I think that INEOS have been quite consistent. Instead of trying to go up in any offers to get ahead or seal the deal, they've very much tried to just be flexible. So the club valuation has stayed the same. It's believed to be around $6.5 billion. And I use dollars because that is actually the currency that they're bidding in. If you put it into pounds, it changes constantly due to conversion rates. So $6.5 billion, somewhere in that ballpark, is the club valuation. And then that club valuation is for 100%. So obviously 69% would go to the Glazers of that number in a full sale, but it may be, for example, that it's only 50% and then Joel and Avram Glazer end up staying. And I think where Ratcliffe can go up and down without placing a new offer is in the laddered exit for Joel and Avram. And this is the thing that will be underreported, but is significant. So if any Glazer stays, the terms of a potential exit can be negotiated, and you might have a scenario, I'm just giving you one example from takeovers that I've covered, where Ratcliffe has the opportunity to buy out the Glazers early, maybe within 2 years or 3 years, and that might be price X. And then similarly, the Glazers might have the opportunity to sell at a different time, and that might be price Y. And then obviously, are they going to fix a price, or is it going to be more variable? These kind of things can all be discussed. So the Glazers, the two that are more attached to the club and may want to stay for longer, might feel that the value of Ratcliffe's bid is higher for them, even if the other four are going now at a different number. And that aspect of the ones that stay and when they're going to leave and what price they're going to leave for, that part might be more negotiable and fluid. It all just depends. There's lots of different scenarios where you can negotiate a laddered form of exit. And it can be optional, it can be contractual, it can be fixed, it can be variable. It all just depends on the deal. And financial experts will know better than me what exactly might be discussed. So Ratcliffe can effectively change the number without tabling a new bid. And I think the other thing is just competitive tension in all of this. And because the groups argue that their structures are like apple and pears. Qatar is 100%, it's debt-free, it's cash. Ratcliffe is flexible, it's almost dealer's choice. If the Glazers want to stay, he'll allow it as long as he gets control. But he's also willing to buy all 69% too. So Ratcliffe doesn't really need to budge on much. But what was telling is that after the Reuters report came out, there was a throwaway line that said, Qatar are negotiating for exclusivity, They haven't got it yet. And by the way, they might not get it because it's fluid. And if Ratcliffe was to make another bid that was improved, it might deny Qatar exclusivity. So regardless of what happens, there's definitely a message in the media that says to Ratcliffe, you still might need to go higher, which is part of the game. And if you flash back a month before, it was the opposite. Ratcliffe was leading. Ratcliffe was going to be named the preferred bidder, supposedly, unless, and here again is the throwaway line, Qatar go higher. And then guess what? They placed a fourth bid and a fifth bid, and now the dynamic has shifted. So this is the game of the takeover. It's very normal. Remember that Rain Group are there to get the best possible deal for the Glazers, and the Glazers are there to create as much competitive tension as possible, which is really difficult when you've only got two primary groups in the race. And this is why Qatar have been quite disciplined, and this is why it's taken them 5 bids to really get firmly in the race, because they just don't see themselves as a rival. So I would describe it as follows. And again, I know that fans just want to hear, have Qatar won? And maybe by the time you're listening to this, Qatar will have won. And I'll report that, because at no point have I said Qatar won't win. Only that I will only say a winner when I am categorical about it, because that is responsible journalism. But what I would say is there's a stalking horse in all of this. I've said it many times. So Qatar think that Jim Ratcliffe is the stalking horse, and he's being kept in the race to drive the number up and up and up. And they take confidence from the fact that the Glazers reached out to Qatar and Nasser Al Khalifi to take a meeting to try and get the bid number up. So that tells you, as I've reported many times, that all 6 are determined sellers for the right price. So this is about money. And Qatar believe if all 6 sell, that they're going to win. So that's their position. And that means that Ratcliffe is the stalking horse to try and drive up the price. And even though the groups deny there's much competitive tension because their bids are very different, the fact that they've bid twice after the April 28th deadline does tell you to an extent that Rain have done their job. That's the Qatar perspective. The Ratcliffe perspective is maybe the Glazers want to stay, maybe flexibility and giving them exactly what they want is a good tactic. And if deep down all 6 don't want to go, then Qatar are the stalking horse and are being made to believe that they're going to win so they can get the best possible deal out of Ratcliffe. And this is basically where we've been at in a holding pattern, infuriatingly, for the last 2 months. And this is why we have to be very cautious in how we report things, because there's always a game. And the media try to go to all sides responsibly so we can stop any fueling of one agenda. And obviously, if we get to the point where in being given one meaty little line, the other side deny it, or somebody else tells you something differently, then you have to just provide that full context, because we haven't had a clear narrative surrounding the Manchester United takeover. Hopefully that will change in the coming days or weeks.
Yeah, people don't like hearing news they don't like hearing, and then blame you for bringing them that news, even if it's true. So, yeah, thank you for doing your best and making sure you report things as accurately and without bias as you possibly can. Let's move on to some transfers then, because you mentioned before that both parties would have liked to have won this sort of bidding war for the club before the start of the transfer window. We're now 6 days into the transfer window. You spoke about Mason Mount before. He seems to be, I wouldn't say United's priority target, because I think a striker is just as important, but he seems to be the most high-profile player United are currently linked with after sort of pulling out of the Harry Kane situation. So we'll start with Mason Mount. I mean, we keep hearing United bid 40 million that was rejected. Presumably that was true. I saw a lot of people reporting that. Then we keep hearing, well, Chelsea want 80 million and United are willing to go up to 55 but haven't made a bid yet. How can it be so public what we're willing to bid, but we haven't made the bid? Surely Chelsea are sat there going, well, they're willing to go up to 55, so we'll wait for that bid. It all seems very public and yet secretive. What's going on with the Mason Mount deal?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same with Arsenal's pursuit of Declan Rice. Everyone knows that West Ham are looking for 100 million plus. So Arsenal came in with their first bid at 80 million. And people often ask me, why would they do that when they know it's going to be rejected? But this is about laying down a marker. And deals are never black and white. So this comes down ultimately to a few factors. One is is Mason Mount going to turn around to Chelsea and say, I don't want to stay. I don't want to sign. And I also don't want a scenario where my contract runs down at the football club. This is the right move for me. Let me go. And player buy-in can help. And obviously Manchester United can potentially use that to their advantage because the player is keen on the move. The other thing is just the end of the month is the end of the financial year. So clubs are well aware that Chelsea need money. So if you're going to go higher, you might wait until the end of June and low ball to try and bully the club into accepting something that they can put on this year's financial books, as opposed to showing your true hand and overpaying when you might feel that Chelsea need to sell. Now, the caveat to that, which is unexpected to a lot of clubs, is that all of these Saudi moves for Chelsea players might mean that Chelsea are healthier as far as their books are concerned. So the power dynamic may change and Chelsea may suddenly be quite comfortable with their finances. And again, reiterate that it's 70 million plus. So Manchester United have to decide whether or not they can be bullish and try and get a lower offer accepted with player buy-in, or whether they are prepared to go higher. I'm still told that Manchester United don't see value in Mason Mount for over 60 million. So now we wait and see the second bid is incoming, what that number is, and whether or not Chelsea are prepared to accept it. The first bid, I can tell you, for 40 million was dismissed instantly and entirely out of hands. Chelsea saw it as insulting. So Manchester United are going to have to go up, and I would have thought to at or in excess of 50 million to start a conversation and potentially offer not just the right number, but a preferable structure as well. If the overall package is to be lower, then you have to compensate for that on the structural side as well. So Mount's position is going to be really important in this. And the other reason Manchester United are being so disciplined is that they're not just looking at it as Mount. As you rightly say, there's other priorities. So I'm told under Glazer ownership, and even under a new owner potentially because of financial fair play, it's roughly 100 million that Manchester United are prepared to spend for 2 early window signings. So if they're to get Mount at 70, it might be at the expense of another signing. If they're to get Mount at 50, they may have 50 odd million in the bank to try and move for another player. And even though the Rasmus Højlund price is a little bit higher, maybe they're prepared to spend 150 and 120 million. And maybe it's Mount at 50 and Højlund at 70. Originally, it's not going to be possible now. When they were looking at Kim, that deal was around 50 million. So again, it would have been Kim at 50, Mount at 50, and then you get 2 within your budget. So this is why Manchester United are being so strict. It's not just about what they're prepared to pay for Mount, it's about what's left for another signing as well. But there remains a high probability that Mount will leave Chelsea, and Manchester United is still the most likely destination. But just keep an eye on what type of numbers Chelsea bring in for some of the players linked with Saudi, and also maybe Kai Havertz as well. That one I think is getting quite close in terms of a club-to-club agreement for somewhere between 60 and 65 million. Because the more money Chelsea bring in, the more they're just going to hold out for a number on Mason Mount, which is why, again, is the player going to influence things? Is the player going to do what Havertz has done and go directly to the Chelsea hierarchy and say, I want this move, let me have it? Because as soon as the player says they don't want to be at the football club, the prospective buyer has a lot more control. And this, by the way, just briefly on Kane, is what Manchester United did. They knew that Daniel Levy would be against a sale. That was always the case. I've reported many times that Spurs were quite calm about the Kane situation. And believe it or not, in October, they thought that he would sign a new deal. Now they don't mind if he doesn't sign a new deal imminently, because they think that he's not going to throw his toys out the pram. He's going to be respectful of the football club. So if Levy says you're staying, even if I leave you on a free, then Kane's not going to influence that publicly or aggressively necessarily. So Manchester United, first and foremost, went to the Kane side to find out, are you going to help us with this transfer? Because we dealt with Daniel Levy, with Dimitar Berbatov. We didn't enjoy that experience. So the last thing we want to do is enter into a drawn-out saga with Spurs that we stand little chance of winning, and find that the player doesn't do anything to help us. And Kane obviously has such an affinity with Spurs that he's not going to want to leave to a Premier League rival on acrimonious terms. And this, I think, is why Manchester United moved early on Kane, to make sure that they were not messed around. And then if it's not possible, you move on to other targets with plenty of the window left. And it will get to the point like that where it's the same with Mount. They'll go up and they'll feel like they've offered a fair number for a player whose contract is winding down. And then it's about Mount. Is he going to turn around to Chelsea and say, give me this move, I don't want to be here? And if he does, then Manchester United still stand a realistic chance of getting the player, because there is, at the time we're recording, there's a high probability that Mason Mount will leave.
You talk about the potential selling of Chelsea players. Kovacic, I think, to Man City is another one that looks like it could well happen, or Kovacic somewhere anyway. Havertz, and then this sort of host of potential sales to Saudi teams. There's been some links that sort of point out the kind coincidence that the team in Chelsea, who have spent the most money in the last 12 months, are desperate to sell players, are desperate to recoup big fees for some players, seemingly have the most interest from of all Premier League clubs from the Saudi League. Do you see is that simply a coincidence, or do you think that there's something more going on there? Because it is an interesting one. Chelsea are desperate to sell everyone, and look, this sort of almost Saudi kind of gift is being brought along, where they're getting crazy money for players who were almost surplus to requirements.
Yeah, I think that Chelsea have just hit the jackpot. It's as simple as that. I don't think there's anything particularly untoward about it. What I would say is that Chelsea's owners have got an excellent relationship with PIF, who are driving the deals, both through Kane International, which Todd Bowley's involved in, and also Clearlake Capital and PIF are very familiar with each other as well. So that relationship doesn't point to anything untoward. It just tells you they know each other. The reason why I think it looks so dramatic and in Chelsea's interests is, as you've already said, because they've got a lot of players surplus to requirements. And if Chelsea have got one of the most swollen squads in the Premier League, it's normal that they will be in the conversation for more outgoings than other clubs. And the other thing is just look at the dynamic of how the Saudi Pro League, the government and PIF are working. They're not coming to clubs about one deal, and they're not coming to clubs on behalf of one club. PIF are representing 4 clubs. So if it was Premier League in that structure, and it was Manchester United, Liverpool, Chelsea, Arsenal, all being represented by one body, then of course there would be a lot more business, because it's a higher volume of clubs. And it's also a higher volume of budget, therefore, on show to spend between those 4 clubs. So I understand why people will say that Chelsea are just being bailed out. But why would PIF, the Newcastle United owners, have any interest in bailing Chelsea out? And the other thing is, let's look at what the fees are before we judge it. Because if Kalidou Koulibaly is 35, 40 million, if Hakim Ziyech is 45 million, etc., then you start to say, why would they pay that much? But that's not the scenario at this point. The eye-raising fee is actually Ruben Neves going for 55 million euros from Wolves to Saudi Arabia. So we have to understand what the fee is and then see whose interest it's in. Because right now, I'm not seeing much benefit to Chelsea except getting rid of players they were always trying to get rid of. Now, if it turns out the fees are sky high, we have to scrutinise that, but we don't know yet at this point because the deals are still emerging. So look at it this way. Chelsea wanted to get rid of Lukaku. He didn't want the move to Saudi. That's not benefited Chelsea. It's not benefited PIF. Chelsea wanted N'Golo Kante to extend. He didn't. He's gone off to Al Ittihad. That didn't benefit Chelsea. It's only benefited PIF. So then you're really only left with the Edward Mendy deal, the Hakim Ziyech deal, the Kalidou Koulibaly deal, and maybe the Aubameyang deal.
It's quite a lot of deals, though, isn't it? It's quite a lot.
4 deals, but
Yeah.
I mean, of course, Chelsea want to get rid of their players,
Yeah,
but nobody forces the players to join. So if the players choose to move to Saudi Arabia, that's not Chelsea. That's between the player and PIF and the Saudi deal makers. So yeah, it's a high volume of players, but why wouldn't it be a high volume of players when Chelsea have got a squad that's far too big? I think the point in all of this is just, are Chelsea getting a deal that is above market value financially? And we'll reserve judgment on that when we see what the fee is. But ultimately, Chelsea feel disappointed to have lost Kante. They feel disappointed Lukaku hasn't gone to Saudi Arabia. They feel disappointed that Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang hasn't agreed to anything yet. And then with Ziyech, they were trying to get him off the wage bill in January to PSG. So we know that he was always an outgoing. And obviously, if they get good money for Koulibaly, you have to say that's a great bit of business for Chelsea. But let's wait and see what the fee is, because I think they're going to make a loss off Kalidou Koulibaly. So again, the Saudis will have got a better deal on that. If it's over 30 million, you say how? Because he's over the age of 30 and they will have broken even on the player. But if it's 20 million, then they'll have had the player for a year and they'll have lost 10 million. And with Ziyech, it will just be really interesting to see what the fee is. So I understand it, because all people are looking at is Boehly went to Saudi Arabia and he's very familiar with PIF as a Clear Lake capital. Boehly returns from Saudi Arabia. Potentially 3 or 4 Chelsea players go to Saudi Arabia. But we're going to have to wait and see, because I don't see anything yet that suggests that Chelsea have got any phenomenal deal out of it. They've just got rid of the player. And if they've got rid of the player, they wanted to get rid of the player anyway. So then, unless someone's forced the player to join, you just put it down to Saudi money attracting the player, and then we wait and see what the fees are. Okay,
fair enough. Back to Man United then, because as far as Chelsea are concerned, whatever they're doing is up to them. They're doing everything a strange way, aren't they? The buying players is more strange than how they're selling them at the minute. So I think that's the thing to keep an eye on. Manchester United goalkeeper situation has been one that's been all over the place for the last sort of 12 months. People defending De Gea, people saying that he needs to move on. And then we saw rumours last summer of Ten Hag sort of increasing the potential budget for a new keeper after what he saw against Brentford and Brighton and in training. Then it's been De Gea has been number one all season. He sort of had a few poor games toward the end of the season in crucial games, and that's again led to now more reports of a potential new number one coming in. What's the situation with United's goalkeepers as far as you see it? We've seen Diogo Costa, we've seen David Raya, we've seen Onana as well after you got the Inter Milan top on there after that Champions League final. What's the situation with United's goalkeepers?
Yeah, not an Inter fan, a Leicester fan, but the Inter top carries the CBS or Paramount Plus logo here. So
there you go.
Company loyalty, I suppose, would be one of the reasons why I've chosen to wear this. But I think the situation with De Gea is Manchester United want a number one goalkeeper. And whether De Gea stays or goes, they're in the market for a number one goalkeeper. So that's either a long-term plan to integrate that number one goalkeeper, or it's competition. It reminds me of the Newcastle situation last summer when, of course, Dubravka ended up eventually having that short loan spell at Manchester United. But when Nick Pope came to Newcastle, the situation was unclear, which is odd in hindsight, because people will look at the season Nick Pope had and say, of course, he was always going to be above Dubravka. But Newcastle fans at the time were not so sure whether Dubravka would be their number one or Pope would be their number one. And I think that Manchester United, if they can move for a number one goalkeeper, will move for a number one goalkeeper. And that either puts pressure on De Gea in the short term, or if he stays at the football club, he has to accept a diminished role. So a few months back, the feeling was De Gea would sign. Now I don't think Manchester United are so sure. It's open. There's no guarantee that he'll be staying. And if you're De Gea, I would be also asking the football club exactly that question. Who are you planning on bringing in? So nothing definitive yet, but it's definitely moving more towards a direction of leaving than staying than it was probably 2 months ago. And then in terms of who's being looked at, I think that Costa, as you say, is one of them. I think even though it might not go down well with Manchester United fans, Jordan Pickford is a name on the list as well. Raya will be less likely because it's looking like he'll end up at Tottenham as long as they can agree a fee with Brentford. And if Manchester United enter the race for Raya, then of course Brentford are going to turn around and say, brilliant, another suitor. Now we're going to stick even more so to our 40 million. And there's no way that Manchester United valued David Raya at 40 million. So that one is going to be quite difficult. And Andre Onana is another one that we keep hearing linked with Manchester United. And some have said Chelsea as well in the past. And I think it's true that both clubs have looked, and Chelsea have even had a few conversations, but Inter being really difficult in the market. And that's really interesting because they've got Martinez, they say not for sale, no talks. They've got Barella, they say not for sale, no talks. They've got Bastoni, they say not for sale, no talks. They've got Onana, they say not for sale, no talks. But Inter want Lukaku, and regardless of that, their finances are not in great shape. So I'm getting two completely different narratives here. One is that says Inter publicly won't sell stars, and another one which is amongst all of the industry, everyone thinks every Inter player might be available at the right price. And that's also partly down to the fact that they didn't take PSG's money last summer or in January for Milan Skriniar. Now they're losing him on a free. And that 65 million euros would have helped significantly and allowed them to be more bullish about their stars. So I think that Onana actually might still be available on the market, and there's a little bit of Premier League interest. So what we know from those kind of targets is that they're all number ones, which again tells you that whether De Gea stays or goes, Manchester United would like to bring in someone that can either be the number one right now or can challenge De Gea. This isn't about just letting Henderson go and then signing a number two. This is about trying, if they can, to sign a number one, which is why if De Gea ends up leaving, I don't think the club are as panicked as they might have been if the same eventuality had happened 12 months ago.
Interesting. Yeah, it does. The Inter situation is an odd one, isn't it? Like you said, if they'd have got money for Skriniar, that probably would have bought them Lukaku. Just finally then, and this is a bit of a tricky one, so apologies in advance. Just your opinion. I know that you've made it very clear that the things you report are based on what you're being told, and you make that very clear. But just from what you've seen of deals in the past, and from what you understand from the current status of the thing with Manchester United, and again, all of this can change, I appreciate that. In terms of your opinion, who do you think is most likely to be the next owner of Manchester United?
I mean, it's one of those where, like you say, there's so many moving parts. I've said many times, the Glazers, I am told, and have been told, are determined sellers, which means that if the Qatar fifth offer and or any subsequent negotiation finally hits an acceptable number, I don't think there's anything stopping all six Glazers leaving. I don't think this is about them just wanting to stay for the sake of staying. I think this has always been about money. That's my opinion. I've pretty consistently reported that. So staying doesn't mean not wanting to leave. Staying means wants to leave at a later date when the value of the football club is higher. And going as a six, which would only be Qatar, means the number's been hit. So if Qatar's offer, as has been indicated earlier in the process, is so much lower, there's been allegations the pledged investment has been included within the bid. And consistently, sources on the selling side have referred to Qatar's overall package being either inflated or certain numbers being not necessary to the process, because all the Glazers care about is the club valuation. So everything else is vital to the football club. Of course, the clearing of the debt and the pledged investment. But the only thing that really matters is the club valuation in this process. That's the only thing they're looking at. And despite all of those allegations that Qatar are misrepresenting themselves, Qatar are using the media to try and put pressure on the Glazers to sell, Qatar's third offer not good enough, Qatar's fourth offer not good enough, they've never been kicked out the process. So then when you take that and add the fact that the Glazers reached out to Nasser Al Khalifi and said, let's get in a room and try and get this number up, all signs point to all six Glazers being determined sellers for the right price, which is why I think that Qatar have grown in positivity. And then with Ratcliffe, he's playing less on price, I think, at this point, and more on what the Glazers want to do. And is he giving Joel and Avram an opportunity to go for a high premium at a later date, whilst offering a number that satisfies the other four Glazers now. And that's not me sitting on the fence by outlining that. It's just as soon as I say, I think if I was a betting man, Qatar will win, then people say Ben Jacobs says Qatar's going to win. And that's not responsible journalism, because until I am categorical that Qatar are going to win, my opinion is worthless. I'm a journalist here to give you the context and the way it's moving. And my opinion is that Qatar would not still be in the race unless they stood a very realistic chance of winning. But can I discount Sir Jim Ratcliffe at the time of recording? No. And that's not me sitting on the fence. That's not me refusing to answer the question. It's me saying my opinion is not relevant in clouding the situation. Because every time a journalist either writes a story, which is our job, or broadcasts a story in my case, or gives an opinion, the stock price can go wild. So we shouldn't be here manipulating the market with second guessing the process or jumping the gun. And I don't care whether, having covered the takeover diligently from start to finish, I'm the first, hopefully I will be and get the scoop, or I'm the last. At this point, it's about being right. So who do I think is going to win? Of course, I've got an opinion, but I'm not going to say it out of responsible journalism. But do I think the Glazers are determined sellers? And do I think that Qatar stand a chance? Yes and yes. And the reason for that is because they could have been kicked out the process at any point. So if the Glazers genuinely just wanted to stay for love of the football club, or because they wanted to somehow have some say or control, then what's the point of Qatar being in the race this late in the process? And that's where I think the growing positivity comes from Qatar's side. But we're honestly just going to have to be, dare I say, patient or cautious and wait and see, because both groups, at the time we're recording this, I stress that we started this podcast in the morning on Tuesday. So New York are asleep, Rain are asleep. Maybe that's going to change in the next few hours or weeks. But at the time we're recording this, both groups were in dialogue. And both groups were literally doing tasks associated with a singular preferred bidder. Both groups were lining up the legalities. Both groups were lining up almost to the point of being able to sign something. And that's why everyone's sitting on the fence, because this hasn't been about one group secretly being ready and the other group secretly being pessimistic. This has been about both groups being told, be ready to move, have all your ducks in order. And I would say both groups are 6 feet from the finishing line. But is one group being told they're 6 feet from the finishing line, whilst actually another is 6 inches from the finishing line? And I think that's the worry with both groups. Qatar feel they're 6 feet from the finishing line, but there's just that nagging doubt. Maybe Ratcliffe's 6 inches from the finishing line. And Ratcliffe is feeling like he's 6 feet from the finishing line. But wait a minute, is Qatar actually 6 inches from the finishing line? And that, unfortunately, is where we are. And this is why the Glazers have frustrated everybody, unfortunately, because they've somehow gone through the whole process to date, which is staggering, without categorically and definitively showing their hand, which is quite astonishing. And I feel for Manchester United fans, and I feel for Erik ten Hag, but that is the reality of the situation at the time we're recording.
Well, you know what? I was hoping you'd say, yeah, Qatar's going to win, or yeah, Jim Ratcliffe's going to win. But I think what you've done, like you've said, is actually better than that. You've given us all of the information where we currently are, and we can make our own judgments and we can come up with our own conclusions based on the facts that are there in front of us. So thank you very much for coming on and doing that, Ben.
And by the way as well, Joe.
Oh, go on. Yeah, go.
I was going to say, by the way, I'd love to just be able to tell you in one sentence, X has won. And we all know that anyone that says Qatar will win is going to be the best journalist in the world. They're going to be a hero. But it's not about that. It's about being accurate and categorical. So hopefully that's what I can do soon, because every single person that's covered this takeover from a journalist point of view would love it to be over in a matter of minutes or hours, because we all want to go on holiday. We all want to relax. We all want to stop having the takeover looming over our lives, because it's what's drawing a lot of attention. So yeah, hopefully we'll be able to speak next time, and we'll be able to speak less about what might happen and more about what a new owner of Manchester United will do come the future.
Well, I look forward to that. And knowing the Glazers' timescale, that'll be sometime in 2026. So we'll more than happily get you on then. Thank you very much for coming on, Ben. Thank you for laying all that out for us. Make sure you check out Ben over on CBS Sports. That was Ben Jacobs, football reporter. Thank you for joining us. This has been a one-on-one interview. Hit subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and hit the notification bell as well. We're having all these sorts of interviews with excellent journalists, as well as going live every single time there is breaking news. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you in a bit.